Welcome to DCS Global. We are here once again to provide you with the latest news. Ukrainian military intelligence, HUR, sabotaged a Russian ammunition train in Saint Petersburg, exposing security flaws. HUR also targeted communication towers near Krasnodar, intensifying internal resistance and destabilizing Russia. Let's get into the details. Ukrainian military intelligence, HUR, disrupts logistics operations of the Russian armed forces. Ukrainian counterintelligence officers turned a security gap within local Russian units into an opportunity and obliterated a Russian supply train in St. Petersburg. The train, which was consumed by flames due to an external intervention, was rendered inoperable along with its stockpile of ammunition. As of now, the loss of ammunition and equipment continues to grow uncontrollably for Russian forces, who are paying a severe price for their recklessness on their own soil, while unjustly attempting to occupy Ukraine. With the third anniversary of the full-scale Russia-Ukraine war fast approaching, it is worth recalling that Russian President Vladimir Putin, in his statement on February 24, 2022, claimed that the so-called war objectives would be achieved within just a few months. At the time, the Russian leader assured that the Ukrainian army would surrender by raising the white flag and promised that the impact of the war would never be felt within Russian borders. However, the Ukrainian army, demonstrating an admirable and legitimate defense struggle, proved to the world that numerical superiority is not the key to victory in wars. Not only that, but Ukraine managed to take the fight deep into Russian territory. Especially in 2024, with cross-border operations targeting several military infrastructure sites in Russia, the Ukrainian army's growing pressure has completely altered the dynamics of the war. During this process, counterintelligence services conducted numerous operations to provide an active advantage for the Ukrainian army on the battlefield. However, no one could have foreseen the move targeting St. Petersburg. On January 20, 2025, the main Directorate of Intelligence of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, HUR, issued a critical statement on its official website. The statement revealed that a Russian supply train coded 3M62U was engulfed in flames in the city of St. Petersburg. According to HUR officials, this astonishing development actually took place on January 18, 2025, but Russian media and authorities attempted to conceal it. However, less than 48 hours later, a statement from Ukrainian counterintelligence rendered the Kremlin's censorship entirely ineffective. HUR reported that the incident occurred at the Reishi tram depot in St. Petersburg, where the burning train was used by the Russian armed forces for logistical operations. Officials stated that the fire, caused by external intervention, destroyed all control systems of the train, rendering the locomotive beyond repair. A shocking video accompanying the written statement revealed the event in detail. The footage showed an individual with a concealed face moving freely in the station where the mentioned Russian ammunition train was located, once again highlighting security vulnerabilities in Russian cities. The person was seen pouring flammable liquid into the locomotive's compartment and setting it ablaze, capturing the rising flames in real time. This act is believed to have been carried out by units deployed within Russia by HUR, Ukraine's military intelligence agency. It is worth remembering that during the initial phase of the full-scale war, Russian President Vladimir Putin forced Ukrainian citizens from occupied territories to reside in Russia by granting them Russian passports. However, some Ukrainians, whose fury over the forced annexation of their lands has never subsided, contacted security services and intelligence officers in Kiev to support the legitimate defense struggle from within Russian territory. By January 2025, these Ukrainian resistance fighters had intensified their activities and carried out a similar operation last week. On January 17, 2025, in the early hours, pro-Ukrainian saboteurs set fire to two military communication towers near Krasnodar. Footage and details of this operation were also released on the official website of Ukraine's military intelligence, HUR. In the statement, HUR officials noted that the sabotage was carried out by unidentified saboteurs affiliated with the resistance movement against Putin's regime. The statement read, "Resistance fighters set fire to two communication towers near Krasnodar. The towers were destroyed. Resistance against the punitive war waged against Ukraine within the aggressor state is increasing. Accompanying the written statement were images showing a saboteur wearing a jacket with visible Ukrainian colors, pouring flammable liquid at the base of Russian military communication towers before setting them on fire. These sabotage operations are of great significance in undermining the combat activities of the Russian military. Towards the end of 2024, Ukraine's military intelligence HUR began focusing more on sabotage activities within Russia, effectively conquering the fortress from within. On December 27, 2024, during an operation in Voskresensk, Moscow Oblast, numerous explosions occurred on a Russian ammunition train. HUR claimed that the Russian media attempted to censor the event. Judging by the intensity of Russian propaganda, claiming there was no fire at Voskresensk train station after the explosion, the fear of internal resistance to the Putin regime and loss of control within the country has significantly grown among Kremlin leaders, stated HUR. With rapid and critical advancements during the full-scale war, HUR has significantly enhanced its cross-border intervention capabilities. Apart from sabotage, HUR has triggered a major assassination crisis within Russia, stating multiple times that everyone supporting the unjust Russian aggression and destruction in Ukraine would be punished accordingly. HUR has neutralized many high-ranking Russian military officers and defense industry developers. A recent statement indicating that the assassination crisis in Russia will escalate further in the new year has made Russia and its allies the focus of international sanctions. HUR has also created a portal named War and Sanctions, listing businesses supporting Russian aggression. This portal includes data on Russian arms and military equipment manufacturers, company identities, a general overview of their activities, a list of subsidiaries, and the range of drones they produce. The portal primarily targets Russian drone manufacturers, including the company responsible for developing the Russian variants of Iranian-made Shahed 136 drones. Highlighting the critical importance of Ukraine's legitimate struggle for international stability, HUR called on allies to synchronize and intensify efforts against manufacturers supporting Russian aggression. This list and the detailed information within are expected to become a nightmare for Russia's military-industrial complexes in the coming period. Western nations, already imposing severe sanctions on Russia's oil industry, its largest economic support for sustaining the war, are now poised to target Russia's defense industry directly. On January 10, 2025, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen announced the latest sanctions on Russia's oil industry, stating, "The U.S. is taking comprehensive action against Russia's primary revenue source, which funds its brutal and illegal war against Ukraine. Today's measures strengthen and build on our efforts to undermine Kremlin energy revenues, including the G7+ price cap introduced in 2022. With these actions, we are increasing the sanctions risk associated with Russia's oil trade, including shipping and financial facilitation supporting Russia's oil exports. Although indirect, these sanctions have had a direct impact on the battlefield, plunging the Russian economy into significant instability, particularly in 2024. Western nations targeting Russia's defense industry may yet thwart Putin's plans entirely. The highly anticipated presidential change has finally taken place. With Donald Trump returning to the White House almost 2 months after his victory on November 5, 2024, the fate of the Russia-Ukraine war changed in the first minutes. The comments of analysts about Donald Trump, who first attracted all the attention by stating that he would meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin, caused a huge echo in Kiev. The whole world has started counting down the days for the Putin-Trump meeting, which is supposed to show whether the war will end or move to a global dimension. Russia's unfair invasion attempt against the territory of Ukraine has been continuing unabated since February 24, 2022. The Ukrainian army, which has continued its self-defense struggle with admirable determination so far, has provided effective resistance to Russian aggression, especially thanks to the military support provided by the Western Bloc countries led by the United States. However, with the new U.S. presidential election held in the last quarter of 2024, many question marks have arisen about the fate of the Russia-Ukraine war. Following the victory of Republican Party candidate Donald Trump, many theories have been put forward that the steps the White House will take in the new period may bring an early end to the war or lead to a global catastrophe such as a new world war. The biggest reason why such different ideas were formed was that Donald Trump criticized the Biden administration during the process for the extent of the military support it provided to Ukraine. While discussing whether the new era will end support for Ukraine, the first moves of U.S. President Donald Trump, who eventually returned to the White House, surprised everyone. CNN news agency, which made a critical claim hours before Trump took the presidential oath of office, suggested that Donald Trump's advisors were instructed to arrange a phone call with Russian leader Vladimir Putin a few days after the swearing-in ceremony. Along with this claim, the reconciliation plan that Trump has been talking about for months and guaranteed that he will achieve peace in 24 hours has come up again. After the Biden period, when there was a major increase in tension in U.S.-Russian relations, Trump's effort to contact Putin may prevent many crises in recent days when the footsteps of a global catastrophe such as a new world war have risen. However, Donald Trump believes that the idea of Russia-Ukraine reconciliation talks, which have been discussed many times so far, but without results, will not achieve its goal without either Moscow or Kiev. For this reason, Putin also gave the green light to this move by the U.S. president, who has set his priority as activating contact routes with Moscow, where communication has been stopped for many years. Congratulating Trump on his inauguration a few hours before the presidential swearing-in ceremony in Washington, the Russian leader reported that he was open to dialogue with the new U.S. administration on Ukraine and nuclear weapons. Putin's attitude, which made statements during the Russian Security Council meeting that he was warm to the U.S. theme, also made claims that the peace plan would force Ukraine to make territorial concessions a new topic on the agenda. Vladislav Faraponov, president of the Institute for American Studies, explained that these concerns are unfounded along with details, saying that Trump understands that the war cannot be ended quickly and is making efforts to create this perception in Ukraine as well. Faraponov said, "We should not be afraid of Trump's meeting with Putin, because sooner or later this conversation will already take place. The best thing Ukraine can do is to prepare Trump's environment as much as possible and convey our main warnings." Continuing his statement, Faraponov referred to the ceasefire that came into force in the Gaza Strip on January 19, 2025, and stressed that Donald Trump's special representative Stephen Witkoff personally participated in the negotiations that led to this ceasefire agreement. Therefore, the president of the Institute for American Studies, who thinks that Trump's main goal in the meeting with Putin will be to pave the way for a Ukraine-Russia ceasefire, said, "I don't think Putin will talk about imperial ambitions and similar things. First of all, they will talk about a ceasefire," said the official, who did not believe that the first contact would definitely allocate a ceasefire. On the one hand, Moscow will show interest, but on the other hand, it will say that it is not so simple and make more demands. Putin will not accept the ceasefire so easily and will want to hold the U.S. by the nose. It will take several iterations for a ceasefire. It is also thought that Putin will try to convince Donald Trump in his own interest during this process, and this may create some conditions that Trump will not accept. If Putin makes impossible demands, Donald Trump is expected to continue the current pro-Ukrainian U.S. stance by concluding negotiations very quickly. Bloomberg News Agency's claim dated January 16, 2025, is that U.S. President Donald Trump and his team are preparing a new sanctions strategy that will force Russia to participate in peace talks. The first phase of this strategy is based on withdrawing some sanctions on the Russian oil industry in a way that encourages Russia to compromise. However, at this point, if Russia does not show any goodwill and tries to turn the reconciliation talks into a format that will make its demands accepted, Trump is expected to move to the second stage of the sanctions strategy. At this stage, it is envisaged that the existing sanctions will be continued, and in addition, many Russian enterprises will be clamped down on by sanctions. As a result of the negotiations, it is extremely important to ensure a long-term and even permanent peace, not a short-term ceasefire, because many war analysts and a large majority of leaders in the Western Bloc believe that a possible ceasefire will only buy Russia time to gather forces. Western officials, who think that such a situation will encourage Putin to invade the rest of Ukraine and even advance the war into Europe, believe that it is too early for a compromise to be reached yet, and say that the United States should continue its support for Ukraine. The speech of U.S. President Antony Blinken, dated January 16, 2025, shows that a similar perception prevails throughout the United States. Blinken said that if Kyiv approves, the Trump administration will be in a position to broker a good and strong peace agreement in Ukraine, and stressed that the steps taken during the Biden era and the partners prevented Russia from suppressing Ukraine, therefore claiming that the Western factor will continue to be the decisive factor in the outcome of the war. Blinken said, "I believe that the new administration is in a position to help negotiate for a good deal if the Ukrainians want and choose, and President Donald Trump is talking about making good, strong deals. I think there is an opportunity to get one." However, Blinken emphasized that the ceasefire should be permanent and not a simple pause that would give Russian President Vladimir Putin the chance to rest, recover, and attack again when he sees the right time. So in any ceasefire, you need to include the effective deterrence necessary for Putin not to attack Ukraine again. I think this is a necessary part of any good, strong agreement for Ukraine. Russia is currently suffering major losses on the battlefield, and increasing economic difficulties are making the Kremlin quite tired, Blinken said, claiming that the Russian army has lost about 800,000 soldiers since the first day of the full-scale war. Compared to the gains on the battlefield, it can be easily said that the casualties of the Russian armed forces have increased uncontrollably. Despite the efforts that have been going on for 3 years, the Russian armed forces have still not been able to complete their war goals. The Russian army, which currently occupies about 20% of Ukraine, is applying great pressure in the areas they have captured in order to register the invasion. However, the Kiev government is determined not to recognize the territory currently under Moscow's control as a Russian city. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky believes that Trump's strength and unpredictability will be an effective factor in stopping the war and destruction in Ukraine. At this point, the Ukrainian leader, who argues that Donald Trump's unpredictable approach to the Russian Federation first will create positive results, said, "I don't think President Trump just has the will, he has all these possibilities. And it's not just words. I really trust him. And I think our people also really trust him. So he has enough power to put pressure on him, to put pressure on Putin." The Ukrainian 28th Separate Mechanized Brigade, named after the Knights of the First Winter Operation, gave the enemy attack group in the direction of Toretsk a nightmare. Russian infantry, trying to use an old industrial area in Toretsk as a holding point, were surprised where to run in the face of Ukrainian tankers. The images shared by the Ukrainian brigade, which managed to completely neutralize the Russian military presence in the region as a result of the combined attack, turned Moscow mad with anger. The operation that exposed the lies of the Russian propaganda services rewrote the fate of the Eastern Front. The Russian armed forces, which have been continuing the unfair invasion attempt against the territory of Ukraine since February 24, 2022, have been deeply shaken by the casualty crisis, which has recently completely spiraled out of control. As you may remember, the Ukrainian General Staff reported in their end-of-year report that the Russian army had lost more than 430,000 soldiers in 2024 alone. Despite this loss, the majority of which was caused by the conflicts on the Eastern Front, the occupying Russian forces, which did not abandon their current strategy in 2025, continued their unrequited efforts to make progress in the Donetsk region through small attack groups. As of now, Russian propaganda services, which have made numerous contradictory claims about the offensive attempts concentrated in the directions of Pokrovsk, Kurakhov, and Toretsk, have published news that does not reflect the truth enough to conclude that these regions have been completely captured. However, the recent response from the armed forces of Ukraine to these efforts of the enemy to disrupt Kiev's motivation by creating a false perception has deeply shaken Moscow's prestige. The aforementioned operation was carried out under the leadership of the 28th Separate Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The Ukrainian brigade, which targeted the Russian attack group trying to establish a holding point in the direction of Toretsk, shared a statement on Facebook, including images of the operation process, stating that the Russian attack group has been conducting numerous attacks on an old industrial area off Toretsk for some time. The Ukrainian soldiers have ignited the fuse of a counteroffensive to reverse the situation. The Russian attack group, which targeted a building in the old industrial area shortly before the start of the 28th Brigade's operation, managed to infiltrate the building by turning the fog cover into an opportunity. Following this process at once, the Ukrainian 28th Mechanized Brigade moved to provide support to adjacent units after a very large conflict began in the building. However, due to the presence of Ukrainian soldiers in the building and the fact that these units were less than 20 meters away from the enemy, it was too risky to launch artillery fire. On top of this, the Ukrainian drone operators, who decided to conduct a sensitive attack against the enemy using FPV model unmanned aerial vehicles, soon abandoned these attempts due to adverse weather conditions. However, the FPV model drone attacks during this process were enough to distract the enemy. After the drone attacks, which gave the Ukrainian soldiers the necessary time to evacuate the building and create a defensive position, the main development that will give the Russian forces a nightmare has occurred. Ukrainian tankers, who made a sudden entrance to the battlefield, reached the building occupied by the enemy in a short time thanks to intelligence support. Turning the fog cover to advantage, the Ukrainian tank launched an attack against the building, which the enemy managed to hold for only a few minutes, destroyed the structure. The images of the operation, which once again proved that the enemy could not even reach the openings of the region, let alone reach the center of Toretsk, also eliminated all Moscow's propaganda attempts. Currently, the 9th and 1st Motor Rifle Brigades of the Russian Armed Forces are moving towards the region in order to fully occupy the city of Toretsk. However, it does not seem very possible that these reinforcement units will change the situation at the front. As you may recall, last week the 12th Special Operations Brigade Azov, affiliated to the Ukrainian National Guard Army, managed to capture 23 Russian soldiers in Toretsk. The Azov Brigade, which left no chance except to surrender to the enemy group, including senior staff officers of the Russian army, is vital for the defense of the Toretsk front. The situation is still critical in Pokrovsk, another critical point targeted by the invaders in Donetsk Oblast. Despite all their efforts, the Russian forces, who failed to enter the city, are inflicting the most losses at this point. The Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky, who conveyed the latest developments regarding the process through an interview with war correspondent Andriy Tsaplienko, said, "The enemy is doing everything possible to capture Pokrovsk, and we are doing everything to defend the city, prevent its capture." During the interview, Commander-in-Chief Syrsky sharply criticized the predictions of some war analysts that Pokrovsk will be captured by the Russians over the past year. Some prophets said that we will lose Pokrovsk by September 30th, 2024. However, the date of September 30 has passed. Then they said we would lose on October 30, confirming that the Russian armed forces are continuing their combat activities in the region and have gathered their most qualified and successful units for the capture of Pokrovsk. The commander-in-chief suggested that this does not mean that the Ukrainian defense line will fall, and even everyone can see how cautiously and successfully the defense is being conducted at the moment. The details shared by the Commander-in-Chief are further supported by the report of the Kortisha Operations and Strategic Unit Command. Ukrainian Staff Sergeant Viktor Tregubov, the spokesman of the unit, claimed that the enemy is now even afraid to use tanks due to increasing casualties and increased Ukrainian UAV attacks, suggesting that the Russians are using armored vehicles for logistical purposes rather than attack-oriented. Tregubov said, "The use of armored vehicles and tanks in our regions has greatly decreased. Tanks are no longer used as breakthrough vehicles or even fire support vehicles, but as transport vehicles, so the picture of the whole battle has completely changed in 2 years." Noting that the models of tanks used by the enemy are also remarkably primitive, and the Soviet reserve is widely used on the battlefield, the Ukrainian spokesman said, "The Russians have exhausted their modern tanks, and this is no secret. They have to use third-class defective tanks. Even the Soviet reserve, which Moscow claimed would be enough to fight the entire NATO, has reached the point of exhaustion." This inventory and manpower crisis facing the enemy has ensured that the situation in Pokrovsk is progressing steadily, albeit critically, Tregubov said. Currently, there are 3 roads leading to the city of Pokrovsk, and despite all their attempts, the Russians did not manage to capture any of them. The Russians, who could not launch a direct attack on the city because they could not capture this logistics route, are focused on small settlements south of Pokrovsk. However, the counterattacks launched from the Ukrainian defense line lead to the failure of these attempts by the Russians. Experts predict that if similar developments continue to occur on the Eastern Front, the Russian army may lose its limited gains on many fronts in the long term. As it is known, the Ukrainian army launched the Kursk operation in August 2024 in order to stop Russia's effort to make progress on the Eastern Front. The Russians, who did not care about this operation that opened a new front on Russian territory and did not give Kursk the necessary importance, are now leaving with a defeat from all the counterattacks they tried to repel the Ukrainian military presence from their territory. The irrational insistence of Putin and his team on making progress on the Eastern Front has dragged the Russian army into the worst period in its history. On January 20th, 2025, the Ukrainian General Staff shared its first report of the week, stating that they have neutralized 1,690 Russian soldiers in the last 24 hours. Along with this number, the total loss of soldiers has reached 8,430. The Russian armed forces are also rapidly depleting their inventory stocks. According to the data shared by the Ukrainian General Staff, the Russian armed forces have lost 9,821 tanks, 2,454 armored combat vehicles, 3,448 vehicles and fuel tanks, 2,274 artillery systems, 1,262 multi-barrel rocket launcher systems, 1,049 air defense systems, 369 aircraft, 331 helicopters, 68 unmanned aerial vehicles, 28 ships and boats, and a submarine since the first full-scale war began. The Ukrainian army, on the other hand, continues unabated to undermine the Russian military-industrial complex and eliminate the enemy's supply chain with long-range airstrikes, the impact of which continues to increase. He was thinking that Putin would end the Ukrainian occupation war, which he started with great confidence in February 2022, with an invasion in as little as 2 or 3 months. On the first day of the war, he had made a statement that the war would end without any casualties with the invasion of Ukraine in a period of 2 or 3 months. However, weeks into the third year of the war, thousands of Russian soldiers have lost their lives as the war has spilled over into Russian territory, and Russia is grappling with an economic crisis. For Putin today, the war of occupation of Ukraine has not developed as he expected. The war has changed direction with the support of the United States and Western countries to Ukraine. Ukrainian troops strengthened in the process and set foot on Russian territory with a cross-border operation on August 6th. The entry of Ukrainian troops into the Kursk region is a major blow for Putin. Putin was extremely late in sending troops to the Kursk region. This situation, which war analysts do not understand, points to Putin's military power shortage. Ukrainian troops began their occupation by destroying shipping lines in accordance with the rules of war and began targeting military bases, fuel depots, oil refineries, command centers. Especially after receiving the permission of the United States and Western countries to use long-range missiles, Ukrainian troops began to organize more overwhelming operations against the Russian army. The next target of the Ukrainian troops is the Russian command center in the Kursk region. The command center, whose location was determined by the researches and discoveries of the Ukrainian intelligence, was razed to the ground. Ukrainian troops had targeted and razed a Russian command center in another region in recent weeks. Ukrainian troops continue to inflict major losses on the Russian army in the Kursk region. It is understood by the military losses of North Korean soldiers deployed to the Kursk region that they did not have a combat impact. As it is known, with the long duration of the war, the Russian army had begun to experience a shortage of military power and ammunition with more. Putin had signed an alliance treaty with North Korea, which he thought would be the solution to these problems. This treaty was approved by the Russian parliament in September, and North Korean soldiers were brought to the Kursk region. North Korean soldiers were given the acclimatization process at Kursk. Since this period was very short and North Korean soldiers were deployed to fight on the front lines, North Korea began to suffer major military losses. The general view of the Russian-North Korean alliance is that Putin is in great desperation. Putin has reached a much greater impasse with Ukraine's use of long-range missiles. The North Korean alliance has not provided the strength that it expected. It is estimated that about 12,000 North Korean soldiers lost their lives, about 3,000 of them. The first stage of the Ukrainian leaders' plan for absolute victory was to organize a cross-border operation to Russia and occupy as much Russian territory as possible. The purpose of this plan is to ensure the end of the war by making Putin give up. As it is known, the Ukrainian troops did not have permission to use the long-range missiles of the United States and Western countries. The reason is Putin's nuclear missile threat. Former U.S. President Biden did not allow it in order to avoid a global crisis, but the alliance of North Korea and Russia had made the whole world nervous. Even war analysts interpreted them as the first steps of the Third World War. For this reason, the United States, Britain, France, and Germany have allowed their own long-range missiles to be used by Ukrainian troops in attacks. Putin can no longer control his anger. Putin knows that with these missiles, Ukrainian troops will conduct very effective operations in the Kursk region. Ukrainian troops first targeted oil refineries with permission to use missiles. Many oil refineries have become the target of unmanned aerial vehicles and drones. During these operations carried out by the Ukrainian Air Forces, fires broke out in oil refineries large enough to be seen from satellite. The Kursk region has an important position as Russia's energy sub-resources. The fact that Ukrainian troops caused such great damage to oil refineries is a major blow to the Russian economy. With the prolongation of the war, the Russian economy had suffered great destruction. In addition, the imposition of embargoes at the beginning of the war led to a Russian economic collapse, with Ukrainian troops destroying Russian equipment in every operation. This situation caused the Russian people to leave their country and emigrate. Russia is experiencing the largest migration in its history. The United States and Western countries had noticed Putin's expansionist strategy in the early days of the war. They have decided that they should support Ukraine and put an end to Putin's dangerous progress. The support to Ukraine from the first quarter of the war to this period has put Ukraine on the offensive in 2024. The year 2024 has been Ukraine's year of success. Ukrainian troops entered the Kursk region with their own means before the long-range missile. Thanks to domestically produced low-cost drones and unmanned aerial vehicles, they are conducting successful operations in the regions where Russian soldiers are deployed. The work of Ukrainian intelligence is of great importance in these operations. Ukrainian intelligence directs Ukrainian troops to the right points by giving coordinates with reconnaissance flights and examinations. Separately, they show their power to the whole world by publishing every operation on social media platforms. Important developments that will affect the fate of the war in 2025 will take place very soon. This development will be the decisions that the new U.S. President Trump will make about the war. As is known, Trump claims that he will solve the war at the reconciliation table as soon as possible. There are various comments these days that are close to sitting in the presidential chair. War analysts have one or two opinions about what statements Trump will make about the Ukraine-Russia war when he takes the presidential chair. One of them, of course, is that Trump will end the war by making the compromise he claims, or that Trump likes to be on the side of the powerful and that he will continue to support on Ukraine and make Putin give up. The Ukrainian leader expresses in his statements that Putin will continue his expansionist war policy if the United States and Western countries cut off their support. He emphasizes that all Putin's fear is to lose the war, and there is very little time left for this fear to be realized, that the Ukrainian people will regain their sovereignty in a short time. The Ukrainian troops are signing successful operations in 2024 with the support they receive. Comments are widely made that Trump sees the development of the Ukrainian military and that continued support for Ukraine will be the end of Putin. Although Ukrainian troops are small in number compared to Russian troops, they are superior in military training today. In addition, the Russian-Ukrainian war has completely turned into a technology war. Ukrainian troops have destroyed billions of dollars worth of air systems and radar systems of the Russian army with low-cost drones and unmanned aerial vehicles. With the important steps taken by the Ukrainian army in the defense weapons industry, the production of drones and unmanned aerial vehicles has also accelerated. The leader of Ukraine often expresses that they aim to enter the world rankings in the arms and defense sector so that their people will not experience the same destruction in the future. Putin has caused great destruction in Ukraine with his inhumane operations, contrary to the rules of war. Ukraine has entered the recovery process with the supports it has received.